how dangerous a situation? It's been rather forgotten because so much else has been going on. But how here we have two nuclear powers at odds with each other, and there's fighting almost all the time, isn't there, at a low level? You know, how dangerous a situation is Kashmir?
Peter, if you look at the flashpoints, probably the nuclear flashpoint right now in the world is Pakistan, India. Because nowhere else is there such a situation where there are two nuclear armed countries who've had 3 wars before they were nuclear armed. So we haven't had a war since then, so because of the deterrent.
I think as a 13-year-old you wanted to join up, didn't you, in 1960?
I still remember.
65, yes.
I still remember that. But I feel that, you know, we had this little skirmish when there was a suicide bomb which went off in Kashmir. Indian soldiers were killed, and they blamed us. We kept saying that we will give us any evidence and we will hold those responsible, we will take them, but have them punished or even give them to India. Rather than giving us evidence, they bombed us. Fortunately, there was no loss of life, so you know, Pakistan also retaliated, again bombed somewhere, and then they shot down an Indian plane. So in that situation, I mean, I as a chief executive felt it could have gone anywhere. We immediately returned the pilot, you know, was shot down to cool down things, because once two nuclear armed countries get into the situation like we did, it can go anywhere. So I think I actually addressed the United Nations too and told them that, look, you came into being to stop this sort of thing. There's an unresolved issue. It's your own Security Council resolution. In East Timor, the people were given the right, they passed a resolution, they were given a right to decide the destiny, plebiscite, they became independent. Why not Kashmir? And unfortunately, it's because of once, you know, if you're big enough, you have a huge market for other goods, that gives you the leverage actually to get away with, you know, which East Timor could not get away with.
Can I ask you, all this seems incredibly familiar to Palestinians, what's happening to Indian controlled Kashmir. It's almost as if Israel has given India the template, although that's probably a very crude way of putting it. But how dangerous is the liaison between Israel and India right now?
I feel that, well, they are very close, you know. I mean, should we read anything into it that Narendra Modi visits Israel and then he comes back and clamps down on Kashmir and, you know, the events of 5th August 2019, do we think that he got his instruction from there? Because that's what Israel has done. They have just built such a strong security apparatus and they just crush anything. They will send people in, they will kill, assassinate, and then they have total immunity. They, you know, whatever the United Nations General Assembly says, they have complete confidence in the veto power which the US has in the Security Council. So they get away with anything. And I feel that India feels, because now it is being used, or it is considered a bulwark against China, they are now part of the Quad. I feel it's the same thing. India can get away with anything. My whole point is that when they ask us to comment on human rights elsewhere, the worst human rights violation is in Kashmir. Nowhere, maybe in Israel, but nowhere are things as bad as they are in Kashmir.
Were you pressurized by any Gulf country to recognize Israel?
No, we weren't. No one pressurized us. In any case, I mean, Pakistan is a democratic country. I mean, there's no way we can take a decision without carrying our people with us.
So there was no, at no point did someone whisper in your ear and say, why don't you join? This is the incentive for joining the Abraham Accords.
No one did.
I wonder if I could change the subject and quote what I think are very prescient words from your book about Islamophobia in Europe. The ascent of right-wing anti-immigration parties in Europe, the misleading and sometimes downright sensationalist reporting against Muslims in the right-wing Western media, France's ban on the burqa, and so on. Nothing's got any better, have it, as it has it over the last 7 years since you wrote those words?
Peter, look, the problem is, and I blame the Muslim leadership for this too. So first, why did the Muslim leadership allow terrorism and Islam to be connected? What has Islam got to do with terrorism? Just now, this Indian variant of this COVID-19 came across, devastating the world. But the Indians said, look, don't call it Indian variant, call it Delta variant. Well, quite right, because why should sort of any virus be associated with any nation? Similarly, why should terrorism be associated with any religion? No religion would promote terrorism. I mean, so after 9/11, connecting Islam and terrorism, and then saying radical Islam, you know, as if there's some radical Islam which promotes terrorism. There is only one Islam, and that is of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. In Muslim communities, like every human community, there are moderates, there are radicals, there are liberals. I mean, if I first went to Britain, when I first went there were these guys called skinheads. They would beat up people who was a Paki. They would beat them up. Imagine if I looked upon the British societies through what the skinheads were doing. You can't define a religion or a human community by just concentrating on their extremes. So these people are like, we have our fanatics, like the gunman who walks into New Zealand walks and shoots down 50 worshippers. So when you say radical Islam, so for the man in the street in the West, how is he going to distinguish between a moderate Muslim or radical Muslim? How does he distinguish? So all Muslims become a target. This is what Islamophobia is. After 9/11, any incident happened, because I would spend more time in Britain because my children were young there, so I would go and see them. And it was like the whole, people would pray when some terrorist attack took place. Immediately the Muslims would pray, I hope it's not a Muslim, because everyone got branded. After 9/11, I never forget, this journalist called me up and he said, aren't you ashamed of being a Muslim? You know, 1.3 billion people responsible for 19 fanatics or terrorists.
I think I'm right in saying that was Martin Bashir who rang you up.
Yes. You know, not the best of the journalists, but he called me up. I was so shocked by it. So this is the problem, what has happened. What is Islamophobia? People do not realize radical Islam, moderate Islam. I mean, in the Western, how does a man in the street? So all Muslims then, and especially anyone who has a sort of symbol of Muslimness, like wearing a head cover or a beard, although by the way, beards have become quite fashionable now. I hear everyone trendy wears a beard now. But so they became targets and they got insulted. I'm not talking about people who got beaten up or, you know, killed. I'm talking about normal people being abused in the streets in the Western countries just because they look Muslim. So I think it was very unfair. We Muslim leaders should have talked about it, de-linked Islam and terrorism. And secondly, there's this other thing which started with Salman Rushdie.